So the question in terms of when we speak about women, why were they described in the hadith that they lacked aql? The hadith actually is clear. It said that they lacked the aql, and they also lacked that, or they also have half the deen. All right. When we're talking about lacking aql, it is not whatsoever lacking intellect or lacking intelligence whatsoever. Because there is another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually explains that ما رأيت, and the hadith actually emphasizes أذهب بقلوب ذوي الألباب منكن. In other words, there was an emphasis that women had the potential, a potential to control, or let's say to influence someone that is considered at the highest influence, in other words, the highest authority to lead men, to lead a whole community. But then he basically was telling women that, hey, you have that capacity, you have that power to influence and to affect and to have an authority, some form of authority, even over the best of the men, that is, or the ones that are the smartest and most intelligent men. So if the hadith was saying that women lack aql, it absolutely is not speaking about intelligence. It was actually speaking about the type of determination. In other words, women are more likely to compromise. When you look at the word aql, aql is not intellect, but is actually some sort of determination. Which is why when we say in Arabic, i'qil wa tawakkal, i'qil actually means tie it. I'qil wa tawakkal. So he was telling the Sahabi, tie it, in other words, tie it and, put the rope around, and then depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then move on. Now, having that being said, when we actually talk about tying something, that's talking about or referring to determination. And we know that women in general are more likely to compromise on their rights, compromise on many issues, even probably on their identity as well, without us realizing. We tend to compromise even on our own selves. And this is something that, for those that work with dealing with social problems, you'll find that frequently, where women tend to not value themselves or even value a lot of different things. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had required that women would have a wali. The wali was in order to give her that backup, because women tend to compromise easily. Now, as for the second part, when it comes to, so why are they, the part is with naqisat, the word aql and deen. So what about the deen part? So the deen part is that the Prophet ﷺ explained it, that she would basically fast less and pray less. Why? Well, because of the different hormone cycle, the cycle times that she would be getting. So there are certain things that it's not about necessarily an issue of trying to prove equality, but there are certain things that are just a fact of life that also affects their deen. It also affects their spirituality. So there's that piece of it that we could relate to, in where she's going to be fasting less, she's going to be praying less, not necessarily as a punishment. It's not a punishment. In fact, she would not fast or pray during that time, really as a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because she's already going through a lot, whether it's getting or needing the fluids for fasting, and that's why she would break her fast, or probably the pains, or losing certain fluids in her body. The list goes on, and at the same time doesn't pray, because also from a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this does not necessarily mean that women are inherently inferior. Women are inherently worse. Women are inherently just not good in their deen. This is not necessarily saying that, but this is actually saying, well, it does still have another trajectory that influences women's deen and the way they would relate to spirituality. So this is in order to remind women as well that you have those times that can still have their influence on your deen. So enhance your dhikr. And that's why even the Prophet ﷺ was actually telling the Sahabiyat during the time of Salat al-Eid, and he was telling them, well, tasaddaqn, do sadaqah, because I have seen many women in hellfire. This doesn't mean that there aren't women in Jannah. In fact, Al-Qurtubi considered that there are more women in Jannah than men in Jannah. But that's because women tend to actually be higher in terms of population, and statistics basically prove that. And when we're looking at the number, the number of women, for example, we could see more, but the Prophet ﷺ was emphasizing during a day of Eid that do sadaqah, increase your sadaqah, because I've seen many women in hellfire. This is in order to motivate the women to do what usually is probably part of their psychology. So that's why one of the women, she asked, well, why do we happen to be more in hellfire? And the Prophet ﷺ explained it. تُكْثِرْنَ اللَّعْنَ وَتَكْفُرْنَ الْعَشِيرَ. You damn things frequently. And تَكْفُرْنَ الْعَشِيرَ. I want you to look at these 2 points. تَكْفُرْنَ الْعَشِيرَ, in where you would forget the good things that your husbands do. And I want you to look at the pattern right there. تُكْثِرْنَ اللَّعْنَ, you damn things. When do you actually damn things? You're constantly complaining. You're constantly damning things, because women in general, with the hormonal imbalances that happen, we tend to actually have more or a higher probability of going through depression, going through hormonal imbalances that affect our vision, that affect our behavior, that affect a lot of the ways that we relate with our husbands, or the way we relate with the world around us. We have a higher chance of viewing negativity than actually positivity, and then that affects our behavior. So this is not necessarily trying to say women are inferior, but this was actually saying, hey, there's something about you that you really need to recognize in order for you to make sure that you don't fall in that loophole. So when we look at that, it's trying to understand one of the fitan, one of the trials, one of those weaknesses that as women, we will be definitely facing. We have to recognize those parts, those areas of where we're always, going through different imbalances in our body that's affecting our behavior, but that's not necessarily justifiable to say, well, I'm going through this, so therefore I could do it. So therefore I could behave in such a way because, I'm going through probably depression, or I'm going through my cycle, and therefore I can damn things. I could start yelling. I could start, doing these different things. So the Prophet ﷺ was telling you, wait a minute, there's one side that you really got to pay attention to. So this is not speaking about it in a sense of inferiority as much as it was speaking about it as a fact of a women's psychology and women's spirituality that is affected by a number of different things, whether we're talking about the anatomy, or whether we're talking about the psychology, or we're talking about even the part about spirituality and how it affects the woman's relationship with the world around her, or even with the social dynamics that are also affecting her relationship with herself, Allah, her husband, the world around her, and even her own rights. All right. So this is just to put things in perspective and not necessarily an issue of speaking of inferiority, as many times, I would say, many times misunderstood. I hope I answered that one, Maryam.
Yes, barakallah fik. Really, really nice answer. Barakallah fik.
ربي يغفر لنا ويغفر لكم جميعا يا ربي. And Maryam, I can tell your accent is Tunisian. Am I right?
No.
No?
I'm half Algerian, half Romanian. So I'm from Montreal. So it's the French, maybe the French accent, but
okay.
not to be.
All right. All right. على راسي. All right. Any other questions before we end? No. All right.
Can I actually
go ahead? Go ahead. By all means, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, you, and then I'm gonna go. Who was speaking? I don't know. Someone was there.
Is still on actually. Okay, my question is not about the topic we were discussing. I was just wondering if you would do something on Tafsir of Surah An-Nur one day, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. We will be doing Tafsir Surah An-Nur one day, inshallah. Inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Dr. Aisha, can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I specifically wanted to ask about my reading in the Quran, just myself. If you could tell me, like, should I start over again and like a sort of like common, like a tajweed? It's been a while, like since it was back home in Africa, like I had a tajweed, but I just
so we do have a class Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and Tuesdays at 5 and Wednesdays at 2. So you could join our classes, and hopefully, inshallah, that will improve and help you improve the tajweed. We don't usually, for the khatam one, I don't usually comment on the tajweed part, just because it would take a long time for us to do that. So I usually focus on the major mistakes, and we would dismiss the minor ones, which are the tajweed, whether we're talking about sifat al-huruf, makharij, or the qalqala, idgham, all these different rules. I usually don't comment on them just because of time. But definitely join us in the Tuesdays and Wednesdays class, and hopefully, inshallah, that will help you correct and probably even advance your level.
Jazakallah khair.
Wa iyyakum. All right. So, Mariama, go ahead, Mariama, from Montreal. Go ahead, my dear.
Yeah. So, actually, I had like, okay, I'm just gonna go with that one. Sometimes, this is not like as as elaborated as other questions, but anyway, the question was, sometimes I speak with some sisters, and on the regard of like being ungrateful to the husband. I don't know what necessarily I can conseil, I can advise them, because sometimes it is easy for a woman to to not regard what is good of their husband and surpass or I don't know how to use this word, to go to skip the good stuff of your husband, and you're basically just going to be looking at the defaults, or let's say, I don't know, okay, my question in brief is what can you give us some tips on how to be grateful generally? Yeah, that's my question.
I like that one. So when we're actually talking about how to be grateful, I think it first starts with recognizing that those moments as women that we tend to have, let's call it a low mode and a low mood, recognizing those moments. For example, before your cycle, during your cycle, during the pregnancy, sometimes when your body is fluctuating in terms of hormones. So recognizing those moments. At the same time, The second thing is that when you recognize those times, it's really important to just look at a pattern and follow the pattern in terms of when are you looking at things from that negative lens, and try to teach yourself that, count it on a paper, probably write it down on a paper. What are the good things that are that are good in my life? What are the good things in my husband? What are the good things in my kids? What are the good things about me even? All right. I want you to write it down on a paper and write down on the other side, what are the things that you view are always the bad things? And I want you to compare and see, are the bad things necessarily so bad that it's worth my life and worth my marriage? Many times the sisters might probably, let's say she wanted to buy a dress or she wanted to buy something. And because, oh, well, we can't afford it now, let's buy it later, she would start going down and feeling like, oh, why didn't you want me to buy this or something like that? Okay. And not recognize, was it really worth the time that you spent being down and being blue? Was your life worth that dress? Was a couple hours of being moody really worth, that moment that you could have probably, valued your life more important than whatever you're sad or angry about? Another thing, how can I change different things? So it's a matter of changing focus. Many times as women, we tend to look at the weaknesses and not the powers. And that makes us feel many times that we are losing hope, we're moody, we're sad about it, because we're looking at our weaknesses, we're looking at failures. So in Islam, it's always, remember, فَمَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. One of the main reasons why women tend to have, let me say, a higher dose of bad mood swings is really when they feel that fear of, if I don't get in the future, or even sadness because of something that happened in the past. And then that focus starts coming in where I'm afraid of what might happen in the future, or I'm sad of what had happened in the past. And then she connects it, well, everything is not going the right direction. Everything is making me feel that weakness. And then she goes and starts, I would say, burning herself. She starts burning herself because of fear of future and in sorrow of something that happened in the past. And then she starts feeling that, well, this is not fair. I'm not happy. No one's giving me attention. I'm not feeling right. She starts feeling that everything is starting to break in front of her. So that's why Islam actually tells you, well, shift the focus from looking at the past and feeling that sorrow to looking at the future and looking for hope. From looking at the future and finding fear of what might happen if this doesn't happen. And she freaks out because she's more focused. As women, we tend to be more focused on our abilities than many times than trying to look for rational things to change things. So we tend to be very emotional. I know we don't want to be told, hey, you're just being too emotional. But the reason why we tend to be more emotional is really, one, the anatomy of our brain. That's a different thing. But the main reason is because we tend to focus on our feelings towards things than trying to look at the cause and effect of things. We tend to look at the emotions and how we put in a narrative. As women, we don't recognize the effect of that on our life. So we start fitting in more and more narrative, more and more feelings. But when we look at our feelings, when we're looking at the past and we're looking at the future, and then that comes in the negativity. So Islam tells us, well, don't look at yourself as the center of making things work. Because the second that you recognize your weakness as a human being, and you would recognize and start comparing yourself with, well, wait a minute, those men were capable of doing it. And that's why you see the feminist language tends to carry a lot of hate in it. There's always hate in the feminist language. You could see that as if they were really waging a battle on men. That's not what Islam was telling us to do. Don't wage a battle. It's not a battle, not on yourself and not on men. Why are waging that battle on men? Well, that's because they have so much hate because they were just wanting to compete with the men, but they recognized that their body is not really the same as men's body. This is a fact that we know in women's anatomy. It's in men's anatomy are not the same. So, just because you see a certain competition doesn't necessarily mean that you would hate and spread and spew all that hate towards the men. That's why the Prophet ﷺ actually said, إِنَّمَا النِّسَاءُ شَقَائِقُ الرِّجَالِ. Men and women are brethren. There's no fight here. And that's coming in why you could see why that rhetoric of hate that's constantly there in the feminist discourse. The reason for it is really because it's an issue of trying to compete and not recognize that, hey, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you with different things in your body. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you differently because you have a different task. You've got a different responsibility. And that's not inferior. That's not inferior. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted you to embrace your body, embrace the difference in your body. And in fact, when we're talking about embracing motherhood, embracing your body, embracing the differences, that is actually part of recognizing that you don't have to live in that hate and that negativity. You don't have to compete with the men. Embrace the difference. It's actually a ni'mah. At the same time, when this type of negativity comes in, you could see that not only hate, but also some type of feeling remorse. So Islam was telling you, no, wait a minute. بلا من وأسلم وجهه لله وهو محسن. أسلم وجهه لله, where you submit your destination, your face, your wujha, your wajhahu is really face, but this is a metaphor in order to speak about where you're submitting yourself. You're submitting yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and live the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, shifting your focus from your body, from your past, from yourself, to putting it that your focus is Allah Almighty, and that grows with dhikr. So even if you feel moments of you need to stay away from siyam or salah or different things, different rituals, but remember, enhance it with dhikr. Enhance your spirituality with dhikr, because that will shift your focus. When we talk about focus, we're talking about shifting in two things in order to stay away from fear of future and sorrow over the past. Then you need to do two things. أصلح واتقى. أسلم وجهه لله وهو محسن. أصلح واتقى. to do or taqa wa aslaha, to actually do taqwa, live shifting your focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's powers rather than your weakness, live to see hope rather than depression over the past. And of course, that's when you correct the vision, and the correcting the vision in how you focus on things will actually correct a behavior and your relationship with it. I hope I answered the question.
Perfectly, mashallah.
All right, so we'll inshallah meet next time. Rabbi yahfadhkum
Yeah, I
jami'an.
have a question.
Go ahead, my sister. Go ahead.
As Yusuf, if you're sick, do you have to fast?
If you're sick, do you have to fast? You don't have to fast. It's called a rukhsa. A rukhsa means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you the permission to break the fast. So what illness actually gives you the permission to break your fast? Any illness that is prolonged because of fasting, or an illness that is, let's say, increased and let's say enhances the illness, that in that situation you can break the fast. So what does that mean? Let's say a person has a flu or a stomach ache, all right, and their body needed the fluids to break their fast. The body needed the fluids in order to get them stronger to beat that illness, all right? So in that situation, you can break your fast. In fact, some scholars like Ishaq ibn Rahawai said, even if it's a finger cut, you need the fluids, you need the medication, whatever it is, you needed, those different things to help you move on with your fast. So, I'm just laying out the difference, the different opinions and laying out the different things, all right? But I wouldn't go as a finger cut giving you the permission, but I would say, if you feel that, oh, my stomach is hurting, or I have a flu and I need some soup to get me stronger, to be able to do my dhikr, to be able to do my salah, etc., well, then break your fast and you're not held accountable. You'll just make it up on another day. So that's why the ayah actually says, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا. The word maridan was not specified. It didn't specify any type of a disease, and just let it in a vague and, let's say, in an unidentified comprehensive word. If it's illness, you yourself can decide, I think it would be better for me to break my fast. You yourself decide it with taqwa, with integrity. And if you feel that you would need fluids, that's okay. You can break your fast.
Sister Aisha, if you don't mind, about my last question, about Arabic languages that has different level of person, Sister Aisha, if you don't mind.
So generally speaking, when we're talking about Lugha Arabiya, all right, just having the Arabic language yes, it's definitely a privilege to be able to understand what the words are saying, but the ability to understand what the words are saying, they actually have, I would say, different levels of how much we understand. Take a look at, for example, Abu Lahab. Take a look at Abu Jahl. Did they understand what the words are saying? They clearly understood what the words are saying, and that's why they totally went against Islam. All right. So having the Arabic language is not enough. That is definitely important, because by knowing Arabic, you're then getting deeper in understanding the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to work on that is important to help you understand the deen, but not because a person knows the Arabiya, it doesn't whatsoever make them necessarily higher in their deen. All right, that's a very important thing. Not because someone knows probably the surface of what the words are saying. It doesn't make them higher in the deen, because فإنها لا تعمى الأبصار ولكن تعمى القلوب التي في الصدور. And same thing, just like when the ayah said that it's not the eyes that are blind, but it's actually فإنها لا تعمى الأبصار ولكن تعمى القلوب التي في الصدور. It's the hearts that are blinded. And that's the same thing. It's not the ears that hear. It's an issue of comprehending and letting the ears fully absorb what the words are saying. And when we're talking about absorbing, we're talking about the way that affects the person's heart. All right. So this is important. This is important to just keep in mind. Yes, it's important to learn Lugha Arabiya to help you understand the words of the Quran and the words of the Hadith. But just wanted to also mention that one. The other thing is that I think what the part that you wanted me to repeat, which is when we look at people's level of understanding the words, they vary. So what does that mean? I mentioned before the story of Umar ibn al-Khattab when the surah was revealed in Surah إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. The Sahaba, they just thought that, hey, this is bringing optimism in the whole story of Islam, because they saw it, well, this is talking about victory, this is good news. But that's not how Abu Bakr as-Siddiq understood the ayah. He heard the ayat, he heard the surah, and he started crying. And when he was asked why, he said the surah is actually giving us condolences and telling us that the death of the Prophet ﷺ has come to an end, or it is near. How did Abu Bakr as-Siddiq understand it that way? So he understood that, hey, this is telling us that the mission is done, is complete. So therefore, we know that the Prophet ﷺ was sent for a mission. The mission is complete. That means the Prophet ﷺ's time is ending. This is how we look at, even though all the Sahaba were definitely understanding the same Lugha Arabiya level, but you could see that their understanding, or even our understanding, would actually vary in how we understand in between the lines. And that's why you will have the books of tafsir actually go in different levels of how they look in between the lines, how they look at the words, how they connect between the semantics, the words, the past and the tense, and all these different things, and even the way that something is put in early, before, and the structure of that sentence, etc. You will see that some scholars might have mentioned one side of the tafsir and a hint in the words and the way they are worded. Another tafsir might not have recognized it. And that's why reading more than one tafsir is extremely important, because they go at different levels. In the Quran, you'll never come to a final end to recognizing or learning or absorbing fully the different miracles in it, because it's the word of Allah Almighty. لا تنقضي عجائبه. All the different things that will amuse you will never end. They will be on and on and on. And you can never have enough of reading Quran. So I hope I answered that one. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone.
Dr. Aisha, I have a question. Can you
Go
pause
ahead,
the
Asma.
live stream?
Go
Can you
ahead.
pause the live stream?
That's okay. Today's Saturday.
Can you just pause the live stream?